Fly was too good a friend for me not to be honest with him. But I was so surprised how fast things were going that there wasn't anything for me to say. Who could talk in this breeze anyway? Fly, like most guys, made certain assumptions about women. When we decided just to be friends, I expected a certain strain. But we were pals, buddies, comrades. I liked it that way. But bring another man into the picture and, well, there are consequences. Fly was a big brother. He never did take to Willie, and I don't think he ever thought there'd be the slightest chance I'd ever fall for a religious dude, especially a Mormon. Fall. Well, that was a bad image. I squeezed down between the surging cars, watching the river of brown streaks racing below us as the ground sped past. Albert stood on the metal tongue thing that held the cars together. He kept switching his grip back and forth as the cars shimmied. I never realized they moved that much. I was falling for Albert. Crazy, bugging, retarded. Nothing short of the end of the world could have brought this about. One end of the world order coming up. Maybe we could reverse what had happened and give the human race a reason to go on living. Survivors. Those who refused to go down until the fat monster sang. On Phobos, I thought I might be the only human being left alive in the universe. Then on Deimos, I thought Fly and I might be the only two human beings. However few there were on Earth to stand against the invader, all that mattered was that Fly and I were no longer alone. And looking down on the wide shoulders of my new friend, I hoped I'd be unalone in other ways, too. Drawing near, I saw his lips moving, reciting words that could have been from the Bible for all I knew. Some kind of prayer, I reckoned. It seemed to calm him, give him courage. Guess there's some good in religion after all, if you knew where to look. I wondered if he had the entire Book of Mormon memorized, or just the good parts, the passages that suited his prejudice. I knew somehow that Albert wasn't like that. Maybe the first guy I ever met who guided his lifestyle by his faith, instead of the other way around. He stopped and looked up at me and smiled. With an opening like that, he could hardly blame me for taking the next step further down the ladder. "Albert!" I shrieked. He said something, but I couldn't hear him. I was probably embarrassing him. There was nothing new for me when it came to interpersonal relationships. "I find you really attractive!" I bellowed romantically, secure in the knowledge that he couldn't hear a damned word. Then I shut up and listened to the train wheels. "Something, mumble something," he said. Damn, he was embarrassed. But he pressed on, as brave with me as he'd been with the monsters. Now why did I make such a comparison? Typical Arlene, I said to myself. Always your own worst critic. "I don't mean to make you uncomfortable," I silently mouthed into the maelstrom. He shook his head and shrugged, which might have meant, "I don't have the faintest idea what you're saying." But I preferred to interpret it as, "Nonsense, my darling. My religion is really important to me, but so are you, and I know how you feel about it." He had me right there. I didn't want to say anything right then. Physical combat can be so much easier than the other kind. I listened to the steady rhythm of the train wheels, pounding in my skull like a 50 caliber machine gun, drowning out even the 300-kilometer-per-hour typhoon we rolled through. The irregular rattling sound of the coupler, waiting for Albert's hands to reach down and seize it, sounded like ground-to-air artillery. I looked at the ground unfurling beneath us like a giant banner. Then I looked up at blurs that might be trees or telephone poles, shading a dawn green as a line before it rotted and became zombie lotion. "I can't give you what you want," I said at normal speaking volume. Even I couldn't hear me. He said nothing, but looked up shyly at me. I liked him calling me beautiful. With his eyes, at least. I liked it a lot. Being honest came more easily now that we were both admitting our mutual attraction. Well, you know what I mean. This wasn't exactly the best spot for a romantic conversation, but I knew what he would be admitting if I could hear him. It wasn't only that I had problems with his religion. I didn't like any of them. I don't like turning over moral authority to a bearded ghost that you can't find when everything blows up. Besides, we might not be compatible in other ways. Huh, how pure Arlene was. Telling the man I wanted all the reasons why it would never work. I was grateful that it was so noisy down here that Fly couldn't hear a word. Well, time to shift from negatives to positives. But Albert, we could give it a try, I said, not caring that I was basically talking to the wind and to the wheels. He wasn't even looking at me at the moment, concentrating on keeping his balance and not losing a finger in the metal clacking thing. We could date, you know? Spend a few nights together if we live through this. Who knows? Something might happen. Again, he left me to the contemplation of the train and the terrain. He was obviously struggling over what I'd said. It was pretty obvious that 4 forces were fighting in him at this moment. Morality, manners, moi, and volume comma, lack of. And finally, he worked up his nerve, craned his neck again where he could look me in the eye and said, "Something, rumble, something, question mark?" Now that was a conversation stopper, but I only let it stop us for a moment. "You mean you're a virgin?" I asked, incredulous. He tilted his head to the side. Was that a yes? "But you're a Marine!" I howled in amazement. I burst out laughing at my own outburst. The Church of the Marine loomed larger in my mind than any competing firm. Of course, there are Marines who remain loyal to their wives or abstain from sex for religious reasons. Hey, fornication's not part of the job description. Amazing but true. Still, the odds were against the clean-living Marine. "You ever heard the phrase, 'there's no virgins in foxholes'?" I asked. He watched my animated, one-sided dialogue. It wasn't really a monologue. In puzzlement, tortured soul that he was. I couldn't give up that easily. What about the various ports and landing zones he must have visited on his sea tour? Bombay, Madrid, Manila, Hong Kong, Calcutta, Kuwait City? Albert smiled at me again. Progress. I had an admission. I knew how I would conduct the cross-examination. "So, tell me, Mr. Marine Corps Sniper, did you never visit any of the local sex scenes? The cages of Bombay that hang over the street where you have sex with a pros in full view? The port pros in Manila? The Hong Kong sex tours, where a soldier with a few bucks in his pocket can visit a dozen knocking shops in a day and a half? How about Kafiri City, with more glory holes than any other?" You don't know? Oh, you place your you-know-what through a hole in a wall, and somebody on the other side does, you know. Yeah, maybe it was his morals. Maybe he just didn't want his gun to turn green and fall off. The angle was probably tough on his neck, but he swiveled his body a little so he could almost face me. Something jumble, something interrogative? Me? Well, no, not exactly. He stared at me a while longer. No, those places tend to be attractions for a male Marine. What would I do with a glory hole, for Pete's sake? I could work the other side, theoretically. All right. He might have been naive in some ways, but he was a man of the world in others. The contradictions in this big man appealed to me. He contained multitudes. I reached out and touched his cheek, glad he didn't pull away. I was afraid he might have been ready to write me off as a Marine slut. No dice. I was a responsible girl. Responsible behavior in today's world meant carry extra loads and sleep with both eyes open. To quote everybody's third favorite weird German philosopher,
Oswald Spengler. Life, if it would be great, is hard. It demands a choice only between victory and ruin, not between war and peace. And to the victors belong the sacrifices of victory. For that which shuffles querulously and jealously by the side of the events is only literature.
Hey, that could be our first date. We hurl quotations at each other from 30 paces.